Dear trading friends, today I have a super exciting update video for you. I'm doing a technical analysis of Bitcoin and Ethereum, this time on a smaller time frame. What currently looks like a local bottom. How could things develop from here? With the level 2 data from the liquidation heat map, there's a wonderful alignment. But also the level 2 data of the whale orders, that is where the institutions and the whales have placed their orders. I found a match there as well, which is also the reason why I'm currently scaling my open position here. With Bitcoin, first of all, I now have two orders, each with 0.1 Bitcoin placed so that my average purchase price can be lowered a bit here. But I have another level, and you can see it here, the 58,000 US dollars, where I have 0.5 Bitcoin that I buy on PIONEX, but at exactly the same price, also 0.5 Bitcoin on Bitget. Why am I doing this? I want to show you that as well, because this Fibonacci extension level gave me a wonderful match at 1809. You know this is again from a long-term perspective. Just so you know why I'm buying my first whole Bitcoin there now instead of these small partial orders, it's simply because of the 0.618 at the complete correction level of this bull market, which is also where my price target level is. Especially when we look at the weekly chart, I've shown you this again and again in the last videos, we're reaching a very, very exciting level. Not only is the 200 SMA here, we also have a target label here, 1809 and the 0.618. We'll also go through the liquidation heat map and take a look to see if there's enough liquidity there as well. But as we know in the 2-year liquidation heat map, we even have 8 billion in that area, US dollars lying there. Despite all that, I want to slowly but surely start buying again and also scale up my long position. But now, let's move on to the smaller time frame for Bitcoin before we continue with Ethereum. What does it currently look like for me? After we had this break in structure to the downside here, I now see that we've broken out of this one pattern here. Actually, it was a bit different. We broke out much earlier, namely in this area, and are now on the way down. And at the current moment, for me, if I now include the liquidation heat map, we can see in this area that we have a cluster at 62,466, then another one at 61,529, and the next one is down around 60,507. If I now compare this with the whale orders, that is, the institutional orders here, this exact price range I mentioned is included here. So that's where a bit of money is flowing in. At the moment, there are about 250 million US dollars here. Long positions, or rather partly long positions, partly spot purchases. But what we've also seen now, I mentioned this yesterday on Telegram. If you're not on Telegram yet, check the link in the video description. You'll find access there completely free of charge. And I regularly share interesting zones there. I already showed it yesterday, that we dipped into a very strong order cluster here and then moved up. But I pointed out that in this area, we had an incredible number of new long orders as well as spot purchases. And if we add this up now, you'll soon see that here, 1.21 billion US dollars in futures long positions came in on Binance alone. After that, there were another 250 million US dollars at OKX, and then a few more spot buyers. So it was really incredible what has come in here at this point in time. We can also see that as of today, a new institution has placed a pattern order here. That simply means a lot of small limit orders split up. That would be the price range from 58,000 US dollars down to 55,800 US dollars. What did I say earlier? If we take a quick look at the daily chart again, that would be, or rather, sorry, we're actually going to the weekly chart. The 58,000 US dollars is the 0.618 Fibonacci level, and that's this exciting level. That's also why I placed my spot buy order in this area, because they keep coming back and getting filled, these orders, but despite everything, this level remains interesting. My current long orders at 60,800 US dollars and 60,500 US dollars also have something to do with the institutional orders here. That's where it starts in this area, 60,853, and it stretches down a bit to just under 60,000 US dollars. Overall, this cluster here is currently only 250 million, which is of course a lot. But at the same time, we must not forget, we also have this wick here. And that one is of course very, very interesting so that it gets triggered. And if we take a look at the Fibonacci extension level that I have drawn here, the very first 1.414 level, which is very often triggered and acts as an early support. It often happens that a recovery comes in, so I currently have my first order placed here at 60,800 US dollars. Which is just above this 1.414 level. If we go further down and completely close the wick, that's just about 60,000 US dollars where we could go, and then both of my orders would be filled. And I can lower my average purchase price a bit further. That will then be around 66,000 US dollars. So for me, I would then be long with about 0.5 Bitcoin at this price. That's still perfectly fine. I still have some Bitcoin left, so that if we go further down and reach my target level, exactly this 1,809 where I also buy spot, I will scale my position again, and then I'll hold back a bit to see what softens the market. Because here we could already be forming more or less a bullish divergence. On the daily chart, which could be quite interesting, but I really want to analyze that in detail when the time comes, because we must not forget, in this price range here, there are $8 billion based on the 2-year liquidation heat map, so it's a super exciting level. If we enter it, I would of course scale my position again here, because my average purchase price. With my long position, I can then scale drastically. And since everything is only with a 1x leverage, my liquidation is absolutely not at risk. At the current moment, it's actually at $35,000. And of course, the more I scale in as the price drops, the lower the liquidation price becomes. So that's currently my assessment for the short situation if we really do reach that point. Otherwise, I'm also ready if we start rising again. I have 2 levels. One is a long-term level. That's in the range of 78,000 to 83,000 US dollars in case we don't go further down from here. Otherwise, I would have to adjust that. But let's look at the short term for now. We mustn't forget one thing. Now, a small recovery from this breakdown to the downside. Here in this area, after we broke through this low to the downside, we played out this triangle downward. Accordingly, a recovery into these Fibonacci levels wouldn't be all that unlikely. And there's something else I want to show. Not only that, but if you look at the liquidation heat map on a weekly basis, take a look at this, where we have a price level here, 89,117 US dollars. There's a bright light here at the low. If we switch to Model 3 for Bitcoin in 1 week, you can see that above that, the largest cluster where an incredible amount is concentrated is at 69,117, roughly speaking. And where would this price level be if we look in here? That would be roughly at the 0.786. For this reason, I will probably already try to target the 0.5 or rather to trade the 0.618 Fibonacci level. But what really gets interesting for me is exactly that, 0.786. That's where I'll also accept some additional risk. Because if we go back again, I think it was the 48-hour chart, we have this large cluster here at around 67,991. We're then just above the 0.618 here. So for me, the 0.618 level is definitely interesting, but the 0.786 is even more exciting. That's why I'm not even sure yet if I'll trade the 0.5 Fibonacci level. But this one here as a short, or rather the 0.786 as a short, I will definitely take that trade and test it for myself. That's all for now about Bitcoin, so those are my 2 scenarios. If we go down, then I'll scale into my long position here, and I'll also watch what the price does when we reach the target levels. I'll be buying more anyway, and will scale my position again at 57,800 US dollars. A bit above this 1.809 and 0.618 Fibonacci. And those are, at this point in time, my short-term to mid-term price levels that I'm targeting. Before we move on to Ethereum, we also had a question on YouTube. 2 coins for the liquidation heat map on a 2-year basis. One was Fed and the other was SAI. Unfortunately, at the moment, we have no way to look into it, neither for Fed nor for SA. If we look into SAI, where we have the current price and where the largest liquidation cluster is, on this long-term basis, Fed actually has an incredibly large potential for a 500% increase. But we also have to keep one thing in mind. If I look at the all-time crypto chart for SAI, you can see that we're actually below the launch level and have actually formed new lows. Despite all that, if someone is holding SA or maybe wants to buy it, here is the current target level. At around 40 cents, that's about 520% that you could gain. That's exactly where this liquidation cluster is. Of course, none of this is investment advice. Be careful here, because I don't know how things will go with SAI or if it will ever recover. Then let's go back to Fed. With Fed, we have a similar pattern. Unfortunately, on the liquidation heat map, if we go back 2 years, which I have entered here, the last lower price level was in 2022, or rather 2023. 2 years back. From today, that would be the 2024 level. And unfortunately, at this point, we don't have any insight into that. I just noticed I'm on CryptoCap. Maybe we need to switch to the Binance chart. That's exactly where it is. Exactly in 2023, we had the last low. And with Fetch, we really need to look in detail at where possible new lows could be, because we've just picked up an incredible amount of volume right now. But don't forget, if someone is holding Fetch, there's also the possibility, especially during this consolidation, that we could dip in again here. Despite everything, if we look at the liquidation clusters above us, with Fetch, we have one at 71 cents and another at just under $2. So that's actually super interesting as well, if someone is holding or is interested in buying this coin. From now, we're at 72 cents, I think I just said. That's a 400% increase, and the other one is at $2 in that range. If you want to buy altcoins with risk, that's about 1,241% you could potentially gain. Of course, you also need to have conviction in the coin, but I actually see fetch if it goes on another bull run as a possible opportunity. Now to wrap up, let's continue with Ethereum. You can see here, basically, the chart looks exactly the same as with Bitcoin. We have a target level to the downside. Again, there are institutional orders here as well. I've marked this in yellow, but not just here. We'll take a look at that in a moment, but also here in this area, between 1,500 and 1,400 US dollars, there are more large institutional orders. We'll take a look at that in a moment on the liquidation heat map. The first larger cluster is in this area here. If we look inside, between 1,800 and 1,700 US dollars. Currently on Binance, we have 255 million US dollars in longs and otherwise smaller spot purchases. So also a bit in futures on OKX. But overall, we're talking about roughly 270 million waiting in this price range. 1,800 to 1,700 US dollars. What kind of price range is this? That again lies exactly in this wick, just like we see with Bitcoin, this long wick that extends all the way down here. So actually, if we look at where this low occurred, the wick is almost exactly at the 1.414 level. That's why for me, it's actually a super interesting level, the 1,752 US dollars. And then it gets interesting to see whether we will also reach the 1,701 US dollars due to the orders placed here by institutional investors. So at the current time, even if I draw this again, it's really nothing else except that we haven't made a new high here, and that's roughly where our price target levels could be at the moment. Personally though, I have my new spot purchase for Firo that I will be making. For Pyrex, I have placed 10 Ethereum here that I want to buy, actually at 1,500 US dollars. I'll show you later exactly why that is. For that, we need to look at the 2-year liquidation heat map. I don't see it as unlikely because even if we go in and look at this exact institutional cluster that is placed down here and see where it is, it's at the previous lows from 2025, where Ethereum already crashed down quite significantly. And that would be exactly in that price range. And we can see that as well. On the 2-year liquidation heat map, we can see that there is a cluster here where a lot of liquidity is located. At the current point in time, it's exactly the same here for me. We have long-term Fibonacci levels, which I will of course target, unless we continue to fall below them. In that case, I would adjust around 2,400 to 2,500, which will be super interesting. But at this moment, as I said, the smaller time frame is going to be really exciting. And now we'll also take a look at the liquidation heat map. If we recover, the 1,900 to 2,000 US dollar range would be super interesting. Because right now I'm looking at the 3-day time frame. If we see an increase now, by the way, we also have a liquidation cluster at 1,788 here, which extends down to 1,734. That would all be roughly within the range just before the 1414 down to the 1618 Fibonacci extension level. But above us, once we're in there, we have a large cluster at 1988 US dollars and then up to 2006. Then 2006 US dollars would be exactly at this 0.5, actually already a bit above it, so just a little above this area here. If we should recover, then already prepare a short position here, because to me that actually looks quite interesting, especially if we look at it on a 3-day basis. But here too, of course, we want to analyze the week, just like with Bitcoin. We see this cluster here, and it stands out here just as strongly as with Bitcoin, this almost 70,000 US dollars. We can see starting from 1996 up to 2021 US dollars. And that would actually be the 0.618 Fibonacci, where we have the second opportunity for a short entry. I want to take advantage of that for myself, because here we really have a continuation of this smaller price action. For me, the question is, do we go straight into the target levels, whether it's Bitcoin or Ethereum, it doesn't really matter, or do we recover first? And maybe we only reach these potential target levels later, where the institutions are also waiting, where the liquidity is also waiting. I'm definitely preparing myself for that, because if we go further down, then of course I also have to adjust my Fibonacci retracement. And then it gets even more interesting. Where could our entry points be? If, for example, we go down to 1,700 US dollars, I'll need that. I wouldn't even trade the 0.5 Fibonacci, because the 0.618 Fibonacci becomes much more interesting. And I first have to wait and see if we drop, how far will we drop? And then of course I'll adjust it again. At the current moment, if a recovery comes, then the 0.618 would definitely be very, very interesting for me. I would probably also take the risk on the 0.5. And if we now take a look at this level here, the 1,500 US dollars, why am I speculating so much on it? That simply has to do with the 2-year liquidation heat map. Where previously we had no insight, but now with the institutional orders and the 2-year liquidation heat map, just to make this a bit clearer, and as I zoom in here, Then we see that between 1,528 and 1,436 US dollars, there are an incredible number of billions involved. I'm talking here about another 25 billion, 8 billion, 16 billion, 22 billion, 2 billion. So for me, this could definitely be a level that we could target. Don't forget, we also have quite a bit of liquidity lying below that, down to 1,300 US dollars. Despite all that, I will then keep my long position in Ethereum, which I currently have open. At this point, it holds 11 Ethereum in it. At 1,500 US dollars, another 9 Ethereum will be added to the position. Additional Ethereum that I also buy here on PIONEX, I will gradually add to this position as well. If we continue to go down and actually see lower levels around 1,200 to 1,300 US dollars again for Ethereum, I will lower my average purchase price once more, because then I should be able to, my current purchase price, that is the long price, is at 2,033 US dollars. If I can actually add both to the position, I should have my entry somewhere around 1,500 or 1,600 US dollars and go into the bull market with 30 or maybe even more Ethereum in a long position. On coin margin, of course, that becomes very exciting. Don't forget, if you have any coins that I should analyze, let me know in the comments. Otherwise, I'll see you again in the next video. Until next time.